Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku controlled shadows as the Monarch of Darkness. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The world, for Izuku Midoriya, had always been a place of vibrant color and blinding light. It was in the heroic, primary color palette of All Might's costume, the explosive orange of Katsuki Bakugo's quirk, and the brilliant, unattainable shimmer of a hero license. His own life, by contrast, felt like a faded grayscale photograph. He was a footnote in a world of headlines, a spectator in a stadium of champions. Today, however, he learned what true blackness felt like. It started with the smell, a putrid combination of raw sewage and rancid decay that clawed at the back of his throat. He was on his way home from another day of quiet torment at Aldera Junior High, his mind a swirling vortex of Bakugo's sneering words. Take a swan dive off the roof and pray for a quirk in your next life. And the charred remains of his hero analysis for the future, number 13 notebook. He'd been so lost in his misery, tracing the path through a dim underpass, that he didn't register the gurgling sound behind him until it was too late. Sludge, green and foul, erupted from a manhole cover. It moved with a sickening, liquid intelligence, two malevolent yellow eyes bobbing in the semi-solid mass. A medium-sized invisibility cloak. The villain sloshed, its voice a wet, horrible rasp. Izuku froze, a rabbit caught in the glare of monstrous headlights. His legs, which he'd often dreamed would one day carry him to scenes of heroism, were locked in place by pure, unadulterated terror. He couldn't scream. He couldn't move. The villain surged forward. The feeling was indescribable, a suffocating nightmare made real. Cold, viscous fluid forced its way into his mouth and nostrils, a living tide of filth intent on drowning him from the inside out. He thrashed, his limbs flailing uselessly against the amorphous body. His lungs burned, screaming for air that would not come. Darkness pricked at the edges of his vision, the vibrant world dimming to a pinprick of light. I'm going to die, the thought came, shockingly clear amidst the panic. Is this it? Is this how it ends? Without ever even trying? Then, a sound cut through the roar of blood in his ears. A metallic clang as the manhole cover he just passed was sent flying. Have no fear, you are safe! A voice boomed, a sound as familiar and reassuring as a national anthem. Now that I am here, All Might. The name was a prayer, a mantra, a jolt of lightning that shocked Izuku's fading consciousness. Through the murky green prison, he saw the silhouette, the impossible V-shaped torso, the two iconic tufts of golden hair, the smile that could calm a hurricane. Texas smash! The world became pressure and wind. The concussive force of All Might's punch was so immense it didn't just strike the villain, it atomized it. The sludge was blasted away from Izuku in 1,000 different directions, splattering against the concrete walls of the underpass. The sheer wind pressure changed the atmospheric conditions, and a light drizzle began to fall from a previously clear sky. Izuku collapsed onto the pavement, gasping, retching, and filling his desperate lungs with sweet, beautiful air. His vision swam. Above him stood the sun personified. All Might was there, his massive form blocking out the sky, his signature smile firmly in place. He was scooping the scattered remains of the villain into a pair of empty soda bottles. "Hey All Might," Izuku stammered, his voice raw. "Excellent work holding on, young man. My apologies for getting you caught up in my villain hunt. I don't usually make mistakes like this, but I was in a hurry." All Might laughed, a sound like rolling thunder, and gave him a thumbs up. The fanba in Izuku, long suppressed by years of ridicule but never truly extinguished, roared to life. This was it. The moment he had dreamed of since he was 4 years old. His body moved on autopilot. He scrambled for his backpack, for his ruined, waterlogged notebook. Please," he squeaked, flipping to a fresh page. "An autograph! Oh wow, you're so much bigger in person. I can't believe it's really you, of course." All Might boomed, signing the page with a flourish that covered 2 full pages. "Well, I must be off. The authorities will take it from here." He gave the bottles a pat, securing them in the pockets of his cargo pants, and crouched down, his leg muscles bulging with impossible power. Panic seized Izuku. This was his one chance. The question that had defined his entire miserable existence was on the tip of his tongue. He couldn't let him leave. Not yet. As All Might leaped, a blur of red, white, and blue, Izuku did the stupidest, most reckless thing in his life. He latched onto the hero's leg. The wind was a physical blow, tearing at his face and threatening to rip him from his desperate hold. They soared over the city, a tiny, terrified boy clinging to the leg of a god. Hey! Let go! I love my fans, but this is too much! All Might shouted, trying to pry him off. If I let go now, I'll die! Izuku screamed back, his voice swallowed by the gale. Oh. Right. All Might looked genuinely chagrined. He adjusted his trajectory, landing with a gentle thud on the roof of a nearby department store. Izuku collapsed, his body trembling, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. All Might landed beside him, but the hero was smoking. A strange steam was rising from his body. Not a very smart move, young man, All Might said, his voice strained. He turned, and Izuku's world shattered for the second time that day. The symbol of peace deflated like a cheap balloon. The mountain of muscle dissolved, replaced by a skeletal, almost ghoulish figure with sunken eyes and sharp, angular features. Blood trickled from the corner of his mouth. The iconic smile was gone, replaced by a grimace of perpetual pain. Izuku could only stare, his mind refusing to process what he was seeing. You're a fake? An imposter? The man sighed, a weary, rattling sound. He lifted his shirt, revealing a horrific, swirling scar that covered the left side of his torso. A vortex of ruined flesh that spoke of an injury so catastrophic it was a miracle he was even standing. I am All Might, he said, his voice now thin and reedy. This is the result of a fight with a villain 5 years ago. It destroyed my respiratory system and I lost my stomach. I can only do hero work for about 3 hours a day now. He coughed, spitting a small glob of blood onto the rooftop. That symbol of peace you see on TV? That's just me flexing and smiling to hide the fear underneath. To reassure the world, the reality of it crashed down on Izuku. The invincible hero was fragile, wounded, human. But that humanity didn't stop Izuku. He had to ask. He had to know. He took a deep breath, bowing his head. Even without a power, can I become a hero? Can someone who is quirkless be like you? The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the whistling wind. Izuku kept his eyes squeezed shut, praying, bargaining with a universe that had never once answered him. No, the word was quiet. It wasn't cruel or mocking. It was worse. It was full of pity. Izuku's head snapped up. All Might's expression was somber, his sunken eyes filled with a deep, sorrowful regret. Pro-heroes are always risking their lives, he explained, his voice gentle but firm. Some villains just can't be beaten without a power. I can't simply say, you can become a hero even without a quirk. It's a good dream, kid. A noble one. But it's not realistic. Each word was a nail being hammered into the coffin of his lifelong dream. The light in Izuku's eyes, a flickering candle he had protected against the hurricane of abuse and doubt for 10 long years, was finally extinguished. So, it's impossible, Izuku whispered, the words tasting like ash. All Might nodded slowly. If you want to help people, you can always become a police officer. They get a bad rap because they're often cleaning up after heroes, but it's a fine and respectable profession. He turned and walked towards the rooftop door. I have to go. Don't follow. The door clicked shut, leaving Izuku utterly alone. The city stretched out before him, a sprawling monument to everything he could never be. Bakugo's words from earlier echoed in the hollow space where his heart used to be. Take a swan dive. For a terrifying, fleeting moment, the thought wasn't an insult. It was a suggestion. He shook his head, pushing the dark thought away. He was numb. Empty. He picked up his backpack and trudged towards the stairs, his future a vast, featureless gray plain. As he walked home, his feet dragging on the pavement, a distant explosion rocked the air. Plumes of black smoke billowed into the sky from a few blocks away. Normally, he would have run towards it, his notebook already in hand. It was an instinct as natural as breathing. But today, the instinct was dead. What was the point? He was just a quirkless nobody, a spectator. Still, his feet, guided by years of habit, carried him towards the commotion. He found himself at the edge of a large crowd gathered near the Tacoma Municipal Beach Park shopping district. The scene was one of contained chaos. Buildings were on fire, and heroes were struggling. Death Arms was holding back a collapsing sign, his enhanced strength at its limit. Kamui Woods was frantically evacuating civilians, his wood-based quirk useless against the fire and the enemy. The rookie hero, Empty Lady, couldn't get through the narrow street without causing more damage, and in the center of it all, writhing and thrashing, was the sludge villain. But All Might captured him, Izuku thought, his blood running cold. He looked down at his own clothes, still damp and smelling of sewage. He looked at the chaos. He remembered clinging to All Might's leg, the bottles. They must have fallen out of his pocket mid-flight. This is my fault. The guilt was a physical weight, pressing down on his chest. And then he saw it, thrashing within the villain's slimy grasp, explosions erupting sporadically from his hands, was a familiar shock of spiky, ash-blonde hair. Kaken, Bakugo, the boy who had tormented him, the boy with the perfect quirk, the boy who would undoubtedly become a great hero, was suffocating. His eyes, usually filled with arrogant fury, were wide with genuine, primal terror. They locked with Izuku's for a fraction of a second. They were pleading. The world seemed to stop. The shouts of the heroes, the screams of the crowd, the crackle of the flames, it all faded into a dull, distant hum. All Might was there, at the edge of the crowd, clutching his scarred side. He was out of time. He was just as helpless as everyone else. No one was moving. The heroes were at their limits. The symbol of peace was powerless. Kaken was going to die. And it was his fault. Something inside Izuku snapped. His legs, the same legs that had frozen in the underpass, moved. They moved on their own. He burst through the crowd, a scrawny, green-haired boy armed with nothing but a yellow backpack and a heart full of desperation. "Kid! Stop! You'll get yourself killed!" Death Arms yelled, but Izuku didn't hear him. All he could see was Bakugo's terrified face. He remembered his notebook, his endless analysis. The villain's real body is weak. He's vulnerable in his eyes. He swung his backpack off his shoulders and hurled it with all his might. It soared through the air and struck the villain squarely in the eye. The sludgy monster roared in pain, its grip loosening for a precious second. Izuku was already there, his hands clawing at the viscous slime, trying to dig Bakugo out. "What the hell are you doing, Deku?" Bakugo choked out, his voice a mix of fury and fear. "I don't know," Izuku cried, tears streaming down his face. "My legs just started moving." You looked like you were asking for help." The moment of distraction was over. The villain reformed, its rage focused entirely on the quirkless boy who dared to defy it. A massive tendril of sludge coalesced and shot towards Izuku's face. This was it. He'd bought Bakugo a few seconds, but he had signed his own death warrant. He saw the attack coming, a wave of filth and oblivion. He couldn't dodge. He couldn't fight back. There was nothing he could do. His lungs seized in anticipation of the suffocating grip. The world began to go dark again, the sounds of the world turning into a muted, underwater drone. He was going to die, for real this time. But in that final, infinitesimal moment before impact, as his life hung suspended on the edge of a knife, something impossible happened. Ding! The sound was not auditory. It resonated directly in his mind, a clear, crystalline chime that cut through the fog of his terror, and the world froze. The sludge tendril hung inches from his face, every ripple and droplet suspended in time. Bakugo's horrified expression was a frozen mask. The flames in the background ceased their flickering, becoming solid pillars of orange and yellow. The heroes, the crowd, the dust in the air, all were trapped in a single, silent moment. The only thing that could move was his own consciousness, his eyes darting around in a panic that transcended physical expression. Then, a translucent blue screen materialized before his eyes, shimmering like a heat haze. Black, precise text began to type itself across the display, accompanied by a soft, digital hum. "You have satisfied all the necessary conditions of the secret player, the empty throne. Izuku's mind reeled. Secret player? What is this? A dream? A hallucination before I die. Condition 1, the weakest vessel. You possess no innate power, a body unburdened by the world's conventional systems of strength. You are a blank slate. Condition 2, proximity to death. You have consistently faced the abyss. You have stared into the maw of death and have not been consumed by madness, only despair. Condition 3, unwavering will. In the moment of ultimate despair, when all hope was extinguished, you demonstrated the will to act, the courage to face certain death for the sake of another. You have been found worthy. You have been chosen by the system as a player. The screen flickered, the text vanishing and being replaced by a single, momentous question. It pulsed with a soft, blue light, demanding an answer. The throne of the Shadow Monarch is vacant. Will you accept its power and its burden? Y/N. Time was still. The world was a silent, gray diorama. But here, in this frozen moment, Izuku Midoriya was faced with the first real choice of his life. Everything up to this point had been dictated for him. His quirklessness, his social status, his crushed dreams. This was different. Monarch of Shadows? The title sounded villainous, terrifying. But what did it mean? What was this system? Was it a quirk manifesting at the last possible second? It felt like something else. Something alien, ancient. He looked at the N. What would happen if he chose it? Would time resume, and the sludge would claim him? Would he simply cease to exist? He looked at the Y. It promised power. A burden. A throne. He thought of All Might's pitying eyes. He thought of Bakugo's sneer. He thought of his mother's tears as she apologized for his own birthright. He thought of a lifetime of being told. No, of being told he was less than nothing. Power. The system was offering him power. He didn't know the cost. He didn't know the consequences. But in that moment, standing on the precipice of non-existence, he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He would rather be a monster with the strength to save someone than a helpless victim who could only watch them die. His mind, his very soul, screamed the answer. Yes. Crack. The world didn't just resume. It shattered. Time snapped back into place with the force of a physical blow. The sludge tendril continued its trajectory, but it never reached him. An energy, blacker than a starless night, erupted from Izuku's body. It was not fire or light or force. It was the physical manifestation of a void. It was cold, silent, and utterly absolute. The air grew heavy, thick with an oppressive aura that made the hairs on everyone's arms stand up. The temperature dropped by 20 degrees. From Izuku's shadow on the ground, dozens of inky black tendrils, sharp and solid as obsidian spears, shot upwards. They were not liquid or gas. They were solid darkness, things that had no right to exist in the light. The sludge villain shrieked, a sound of pure agony and terror that was fundamentally different from its earlier grunts of frustration. The shadow tendrils didn't just push it back, they pierced and tore at its semi-liquid form. Where they made contact, the villain's body seemed to dissolve, not into liquid, but into nothingness, as if consumed by the shadow itself. With a final, desperate surge, the shadow tendrils converged, wrapping around Bakugo and yanking him free with surgical precision, depositing him onto the ground several feet away. Then, they turned their full, silent fury on the villain. They constricted, they sliced, they shredded. In seconds, the massive, building-high monster was reduced to a quivering, inert puddle of muck on the asphalt, the fight completely drained from it. The silence that descended upon the street was more profound than the noise that had preceded it. The fire still burned, but no one seemed to notice. The entire crowd, the pro-heroes, and a freshly liberated Bakugo all stared at one person. Izuku stood in the center of the street, trembling. The black tendrils, their purpose served, dissolved back into his shadow as if they had never been. He was shaking not from fear, but from the raw, alien power that was now buzzing under his skin. It felt like his veins were filled with humming, frozen energy. He felt empty and full at the same time. A new screen, visible only to him, flickered into existence. Welcome, player. Title: Monarch of Darkness. Candidate: Level 1. Job: None. Monarch of Darkness. Candidate? The words echoed in his mind, feeling both foreign and frighteningly appropriate. Stay back! Death Arm shouted, taking a cautious, defensive stance. He wasn't looking at the subdued villain. He was looking at Izuku. Everyone, stay back! Kid, put your hands where I can see them! The heroes were treating him as the threat. The power he had just used was so unnatural, so far outside the realm of what they understood a quirk to be, that they had immediately classified it as hostile. Bakugo was on his hands and knees, coughing and gasping for air. He stared at Izuku, his red eyes wide. The usual anger and arrogance were gone, replaced by something Izuku had never seen directed at him before, a mixture of confusion and raw, undisguised fear. He wasn't looking at Deku, the useless, quirkless pebble. He was looking at a monster. Then, a gaunt figure stepped out of the crowd, pushing past the police line. It was All Might, in his skeletal form. The steam had stopped rising from him, but the look on his face was one of profound shock. He had seen everything. He walked forward, his footsteps echoing in the stunned silence. He ignored the puddle of sludge. He ignored the other heroes. His sunken eyes were fixed on Izuku. He came to a stop a few feet away, his expression unreadable. He looked at the boy who, minutes ago, he had dismissed as a powerless dreamer. He looked at the lingering traces of oppressive, dark energy that clung to the air around him. He wasn't going to offer him a quirk. He wasn't going to praise his heroic heart. The situation had changed too fundamentally. The question he had was no longer about heroism, but about existence itself. His voice was a low, serious whisper, devoid of all its usual booming bravado. Young man. All Might began, his gaze piercing, searching, and deeply, deeply unsettled. What are you? Izuku looked down at his own hands. They were trembling violently. Faint wisps of black smoke, like dry ice, curled from his fingertips before dissipating into the air. He felt the cold, immense power coiled in his core, a sleeping leviathan in the depths of his soul. He was still Izuku Midoriya, but he was also something else now. Something new. Something dark. He had no answer for the symbol of peace. He only knew that on a day that began in grayscale despair, the world hadn't just regained its color. It had been plunged into a new, terrifying, and exhilarating shade of black. And he was standing at its epicenter. The world, which had fractured and turned black for Izuku Midoriya, came back into focus under the harsh, sterile lights of an interrogation room. The oppressive aura of his power had faded, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion and the lingering scent of ozone and something else, something that smelled like an open grave. He sat on a cold metal chair, his hands resting on the table in front of him. Opposite him sat a man with a kind, plain face and a trench coat, Detective Naomasa Tsukachi. In the corner of the room, looking more like a wraith than the symbol of peace, stood Tashinori Yagi. So, let's go over this one more time, Midoriya Shonen, Tsukachi said, his voice calm and even. His quirk, human lie detector, had been working overtime for the past hour. So far, not a single falsehood had been registered. And that was the problem. You're telling me you have been quirkless your entire life? A fact confirmed by your medical records and school registration. Yes, sir, Izuku replied, his voice barely a whisper. True. And today, in a moment of extreme duress, you manifested this ability. The black tendrils. Yes, sir. True. You have no idea what it is, where it came from, or how you controlled it. I just wanted to save Kaken. The power, it just came out. True. Tsukachi leaned back, sighing and rubbing his temples. He glanced at Tashinori, who gave a slight, imperceptible shake of his head. The detective turned back to Izuku. And this system you mentioned? These blue screens only you can see? Izuku hesitated. He had explained it once, and the look of profound confusion on their faces told him they thought he was either lying or insane. But the detective's quirk was his only hope of being believed. It appeared when time froze. It said I met some conditions. It called me a player and a candidate for the Monarch of Darkness. He winced as he said the title aloud. It sounded absurd. Villainous. True. The single word hung in the air, a silent bell chime in Tsukachi's mind. Every fantastical, unbelievable part of the boy's story was, by some impossible metric, the truth. He looked at Tashinori, his expression grim. This was beyond their understanding. It wasn't a late bloomer quirk. It was something else entirely. All right, Midoriya Shonen, Sukachi said, closing his notepad. You're free to go. Your mother is waiting outside. But you need to understand, this is an unregistered and unknown power. We will need to monitor you. For your safety, and for everyone else's. Izuku nodded numbly. He was escorted out, falling into the arms of his weeping mother, who hugged him so tightly he could barely breathe. As he left, Toshinori stepped forward. Naomasa, what do you think? I think, the detective said, his voice heavy, that I'm glad I'm not the one who has to figure this out. Toshi, that power. I've been a detective for 20 years. I've seen quirks that can warp reality and level cities. I have never felt anything like that. It was cold. It felt ancient and hateful, and it's inside a 14-year-old boy who, by all accounts, has the heart of a saint. Toshinori stared at the door Izuku had just walked through. The boy was his fault. His carelessness with the villain, his crushing words on the rooftop. He had pushed Izuku to the brink, and something on the other side had reached out and grabbed him. He couldn't give the boy one for all now. The vessel was no longer empty. It was occupied by an unknown, potentially cataclysmic force. Offering to pour a second, world-breaking power into that mix was a risk he couldn't take. But he couldn't abandon him either. He had seen Izuku's face as he ran towards Bakugo. That was not the face of a villain. He had made a promise to himself to find a worthy successor. Perhaps his role now was not to give a successor his power, but to ensure a boy with a new, terrifying power remained a hero. 2 days later, Izuku stood on the trash-covered shore of Takoba Municipal Beach Park. The salt spray did little to mask the stench of decay. He had barely slept, haunted by phantom blue screens that flickered at the edge of his vision and the memory of the cold, void-like energy that now lay dormant within him. A fitting place for a fresh start, wouldn't you say? Izuku jumped, spinning around to see Toshinori Yagi standing there, looking frail in the morning light. All Might! What are you doing here? I came to apologize, Toshinori said, his expression serious. And to make you an offer. I was wrong on that rooftop. I was projecting my own limitations onto you. I told you that you couldn't be a hero without a quirk. But what you have now, it's not a quirk, is it? Izuku shook his head, looking down at his hands. I don't know what it is, neither do I, Toshinori admitted. And that's what worries me. And the hero commission. A power like that, appearing out of nowhere, it makes people nervous. They see you as a potential threat. Izuku flinched. But I saved Kaken. You did. You acted more heroically than any of the pros on the scene. I saw it. But you also wielded a power that felt like death itself. People fear what they don't understand, my boy. He took a step closer, his sunken eyes locking onto Izuku's. I cannot give you my power. I believe it would be unwise. Dangerous even. But I can give you my guidance. I can train your body, help you hone your mind, and be your moral compass. I can help you prove to the world, and to yourself, that it is not the nature of the power that defines a hero, but the heart of the one who wields it. I will help you get into UA. Tears welled in Izuku's eyes. The number one hero, the man he had idolized his entire life, was offering to be his personal mentor. It was a dream come true, born from a nightmare. Yes, Izuku said, bowing so low his forehead almost touched the sand. Yes, please. I'll do anything, Toshinori smiled, a faint echo of All Might's brilliant grin. Good. Then your training starts now. For the next 10 months, this beach will be your gym, your school, and your battlefield. This is my aim to pass, American Dream Plan. You are going to clean this entire section of the coastline. He presented Izuku with a meticulously detailed workout and lifestyle plan that seemed physically impossible. Izuku's heart sank as he looked at the schedule, but a fierce determination burned away the doubt. He would do it. He would master his body, and in doing so, perhaps he could begin to understand the strange darkness that now lived inside him. That first week was hell. His muscles screamed with every piece of scrap metal he hauled, with every tire he dragged through the sand. He would collapse into bed each night, an aching mess, and wake up before dawn to do it all over again. Tashinori was a demanding, if supportive, taskmaster, but Izuku had another trainer. One that was far more demanding, and infinitely less forgiving. On the third day of his training, as he lay exhausted in his bed, a familiar blue screen appeared before him. The system supports the player's growth. A daily quest has been issued. Daily quest: preparing to be strong. Push-ups 0 out of 100. Sit-ups 0 out of 100. Squats 0/100. Running 0/10 km. Warning: failure to complete the daily quest within the time limit will result in a penalty. Izuku stared at the screen. This was on top of the beach cleaning? It was impossible. He was already running on fumes. He tried to dismiss the screen, waving his hand through it, but it remained fixed in his vision. He groaned and rolled over, deciding to ignore it. He was too tired. Surely, nothing would happen. It was a mistake he would only make once. At the stroke of midnight, as the quest timer hit 0, a new screen flashed red. You have failed to complete the daily quest. You will now be transferred to the penalty zone for a set period. The floor beneath his bed dissolved. Not into a hole, but into a flat, black void that spread like spilled ink. Before he could scream, he was falling. The sensation was stomach-churning, a weightless plunge through an endless, dark space. He landed with a soft thud not on his bedroom floor, but on endless, shifting sand under a blood-red sky. He was in a vast desert, stretching to a horizon of jagged, black mountains. The air was dry and smelled of sulfur. Then he heard it, a chittering, skittering sound that seemed to come from all directions at once. From behind a dune, a creature emerged. It was a centipede, but one of monstrous proportions, easily the size of a school bus. Its body was plated in thick, purple chitin, and its dozens of legs clicked menacingly on the sand. Its mandibles, each the size of a man, gnashed together, dripping a viscous green fluid. Izuku's blood ran cold. This was a nightmare. A real, tangible nightmare. Another screen appeared. Penalty quest: survive. Goal: survive for the designated time. Time remaining: 4 hours. 4 hours. He had to survive for 4 hours in a desert filled with giant, venomous centipedes. He ran. He ran with a desperation he didn't know he possessed, his lungs burning, his legs screaming. The monster gave chase, its speed terrifying. It burrowed through the sand, erupting from beneath him, forcing him to dive and roll out of the way of its snapping jaws. For 4 agonizing hours, he did nothing but run, hide, and pray. He earned new scrapes and bruises, his pajamas were torn to shreds, and his mind was frayed to the breaking point by sheer terror. When the timer finally hit 0, the world dissolved again. He found himself back on his bedroom floor, panting and covered in sweat and sand, the first rays of dawn creeping through his window. He never missed a daily quest again. The 10 months became a grueling, cyclical routine. He would wake up, complete his brutal daily quest, then head to the beach to meet Tashinori for the even more brutal American Dream plan. He was constantly operating on a level of exhaustion that should have been impossible, but with each completed quest, a screen would appear. You have completed the daily quest. Your rewards are now available. The rewards were simple at first: status recovery, which would heal his aching muscles and restore his stamina, and stat points 3. He learned to navigate his status screen, a detailed breakdown of his physical and mental attributes. Name: Izuku Midoriya. Level 1. Job: none. Title: Monarch of Darkness. Candidate. HP: 100/100. MP 50/50. Strength 10. Agility 10. Vitality 10. Intelligence 10. Sense 10. He poured all his points into strength and agility, wanting to keep up with Tashinori's regimen. His progress became exponential. Soon, he wasn't just hauling refrigerators, he was lifting them. He wasn't just cleaning the beach, he was reshaping it. Tashinori watched his progress with a mixture of pride and deep-seated concern. The boy's growth was monstrous, far exceeding what his plan alone should have accomplished. He knew it was the system, but he couldn't see it, couldn't quantify it. He could only watch as Izuku transformed. Still, the central mystery remained: his actual power. The shadows. He hadn't been able to summon it since that day. It was a sleeping beast inside him, and he had no idea how to wake it. He couldn't exactly practice in public. The system, as always, provided a solution. About a month into his training, after completing a particularly grueling quest, he received a new reward alongside his stat points. Reward: Instance Dungeon Key rank. Item: Key to the sunken subway station. This key will grant you entry to a sealed, instanced area. Time within the dungeon may flow differently. An instanced dungeon? The term sounded like something straight out of a video game. That night, clutching the strange, ethereal key that shimmered in his hand, he went to his local subway station. As instructed by the system, he stood before a service entrance door and held up the key. You are attempting to enter an instance dungeon. Do you wish to proceed? He took a deep breath and thought, yes. The world warped. The solid steel door shimmered and became translucent. He stepped through it, not into a maintenance closet, but onto the cracked platform of a derelict, flooded subway station. The air was thick with the smell of mildew and stagnant water. Emergency lights flickered erratically, casting long, dancing shadows. You have entered the E-rank dungeon, sunken subway station. He was terrified. But he was also grimly determined. This was it. A place where he could finally test his power without anyone watching. A place where he could let the monster out of its cage. His sense stat, which he had mostly ignored, suddenly flared to life. It was like a sixth sense, a tingling at the base of his skull that warned him of danger. It screamed at him from the darkness of the tunnel ahead. From the murky water, things began to emerge. They were rats, but bloated and twisted, the size of large dogs. Their fur was matted and patchy, and their eyes glowed with a faint, sickly green light. Beast, underdweller rat. There were a dozen of them, their claws scraping on the concrete as they advanced, hissing and baring yellow teeth. Izuku's first instinct was to run, but the penalty zone had taught him that running was only a temporary solution. He had to fight. He grabbed a rusted piece of rebar from a crumbling pillar. His strength stat, now well over 50, made the heavy iron bar feel as light as a baton. He swung. The impact was sickening, a wet crunch as the bar connected with the first rat's skull, sending it flying. But there were too many. They swarmed him, clawing and biting. Pain lanced up his leg as one sank its teeth into his calf. He roared, a mixture of pain and frustration, and kicked it away. He fought with a desperate ferocity, his movements clumsy but fueled by his system-enhanced body. He crushed skulls, broke spines, and slowly, painstakingly, began to thin their numbers. It was brutal, bloody, and nothing like the clean, heroic fights he had always imagined. This was a desperate struggle for survival. After what felt like an eternity, he stood panting amidst the corpses of a dozen giant rats, his body bruised and bleeding. A screen appeared. You have leveled up. You have leveled up. His health and mana fully restored. A feeling of incredible vitality washed over him. The pain vanished. This was the second part of the system's gift, tangible, immediate growth from conflict. He ventured deeper into the station, fighting more rats, and eventually came face to face with their leader, a massive, alpha rat the size of a boar, its eyes glowing with a more intelligent, malevolent light. The fight was a true battle. It was faster and stronger, and it forced him to use his agility to dodge and weave, to learn the rhythms of a real fight. He finally defeated it by jamming the rebar through its eye in a final, desperate thrust. As the body of the boss rat slumped to the ground, its glow fading, a new screen appeared. It was different from the others. It was a simple, stark white text on a black background. Command detected. Arise. Izuku stared at it. Arise? He said the word aloud, his voice echoing in the silent station. It felt strange on his tongue, ancient and powerful. He remembered the title the system had given him. Monarch of Darkness. A monarch gave commands. He looked at the field of dead rats, at their still forms and the shadows they cast in the flickering lights. He took a breath, focused on the largest one, the boss, and spoke the word with intent, pouring all his will into it. Arise. The effect was instantaneous and horrifying. The air in the dungeon plunged to freezing temperatures. A thick, black smoke, colder than ice, began to bleed from the corpse of the alpha rat. It wasn't smoke from a fire. It was the essence of shadow itself. It swirled and coalesced, rising from the body and taking its shape. The form solidified into a perfect, pitch-black replica of the rat, but its eyes burned with a brilliant, electric blue light, full of an eerie, silent intelligence. The shadow creature turned its head, its glowing blue gaze locking onto Izuku. And then, it did something that shook him to his core. It lowered its head in a gesture of subservience. It was waiting for his command. Izuku felt a connection snap into place in his mind. It wasn't a voice, but a feeling, an unwavering sense of loyalty, of purpose, of existence dedicated solely to him. He was its creator, its master, its monarch. Awe and terror warred within him. This was necromancy. He was raising the dead. This was a villain's power. But as he looked at the silent, loyal creature before him, he didn't feel evil. He felt responsible. He tried again, focusing on the smaller rats. Arise. One by one, their shadows detached from their corpses, rising as black smoke and solidifying into blue-eyed soldiers. Soon, he was surrounded by a small pack of shadow rats, all looking at him with silent, unwavering obedience. A new screen explained the mechanics. Skill, Shadow Extraction, LV1, has been acquired. Skill, Shadow Storage, LV1, has been acquired. Shadow Extraction extracts mana from a recently deceased target to create a shadow soldier. Success rate and soldier strength are dependent on the player's intelligence stat and the target's original power. Shadow Storage. The player can store their shadow soldiers within their own shadow. He gave a mental command, a simple thought, return. Instantly, the shadow rats dissolved, not into smoke, but into the floor, melting seamlessly into his own shadow. He looked down and saw nothing unusual, but he could feel them. It was a strange, tingling presence at the edge of his perception, a small army waiting in the wings, forever connected to him. He was never truly alone again. That dungeon was the first of many. Over the next 9 months, his life became a carefully balanced secret. By day, he was Izuku Midoriya, Toshinori's surprisingly capable protege, a boy transforming himself through sheer hard work. By night, he was a player, delving into one E-rank or D-rank dungeon after another, fighting magic beasts, leveling up, and growing his shadow army. His first soldiers were rats, but they were soon replaced. He fought and extracted packs of giant wolves with teeth like daggers. He cleared a dungeon full of goblin-like creatures, extracting their clever shadow counterparts. He learned to use them tactically, sending his wolf pack to flank an enemy while his goblins laid traps. He also began to discover his other skills. During a fight with a heavily armored lizard man, he was disarmed, his cheap dagger skittering across the floor. In a moment of panic, he reached for it, and the dagger shuddered and flew back into his hand, as if pulled by an invisible string. You have awakened the skill, Ruler's Authority, LV1. It was weak, barely more than a light telekinetic tug, but it was another tool in his growing arsenal. He received better gear as rewards from dungeons, a pair of sharp, well-balanced daggers that became his primary weapons, and simple leather armor that he wore under his tracksuit. The boy who had only ever analyzed heroes was now a seasoned combatant, his body covered in a roadmap of faint, silvery scars from battles no one else would ever know he fought. His level rose steadily, and with it, his stats. By the 10th month, he was worlds away from the scrawny, crying boy in the underpass. Name, Izuku Midoriya. Level, 21. Job, none. Title, Monarch of Darkness. Candidate. HP, 2450/2450. MP, 480/480. Strength, 75. Agility, 80. Vitality, 60. Intelligence, 55. Sense, 65. His shadow army numbered 37. A silent, loyal troop of shadow wolves, goblins, and other monstrous beasts he'd slain. They were his secret. His burden. His strength. On the morning of the UA entrance exam, the sun rose over a coastline that was pristine. The sand was clean, the water was clear, and the last piece of rusted scrap, a ruined, hollowed-out van, had been hauled away weeks ago. Izuku stood atop the highest point of the seawall, the place where he'd first met All Might after that fateful day. The rising sun cast his long shadow behind him. He was no longer the hunched, timid boy from 10 months ago. He stood tall, his body lean and corded with the dense muscle born of impossible labor and 100 life-or-death battles. His green eyes, once wide and full of desperate hope, were now sharp and focused, carrying a quiet, unshakable confidence. They held a depth, a darkness, that spoke of the things he had seen in the dungeons, the things he now commanded. Tashinori stood beside him, a proud, almost fatherly smile on his gaunt face. "You did it, my boy. You went beyond. You turned this illegal dumping ground back into a beautiful coastline, and you built a magnificent vessel for yourself in the process. You are ready." Izuku looked out at the ocean, then closed his eyes. He didn't need to look at his shadow to know his army was there. He could feel them, a low thrum of power at the base of his spine. He felt the alpha wolf's silent patience, the goblin shaman's cunning intelligence, the collective, unwavering loyalty of 37 souls bound to his own. He was Izuku Midoriya, the boy who wanted to be a hero more than anything. But he was also something more. He was a player. A warrior. A monarch with an army hidden in plain sight. He opened his eyes, the morning sun reflecting in their determined depths. The UA exam wasn't a hopeful dream anymore. It was the first step. The first campaign. He was ready to claim his throne. The entrance to UA High School was less a gate and more a declaration. It was a colossal archway of shimmering glass and steel, a gateway to the heavens for the tens of thousands of aspiring heroes who flocked to it each year. To the teeming masses of nervous teenagers, it was a symbol of hope, a dream made manifest in concrete and chrome. To Izuku Midoriya, it felt like the entrance to a new, and far more dangerous, dungeon. He walked through the crowd, a silent island in a sea of anxious chatter. He wasn't nervous. The terror of the penalty zone and the life-or-death stakes of the dungeons had burned that particular emotion out of him, replacing it with a cold, sharp-edged vigilance. He could feel the thrum of his 37 soldiers coiled within his shadow, a silent, comforting weight. They were his secret, his strength, and the source of the profound isolation that now separated him from his peers. He wore a simple black tracksuit, the leather pauldrons and vambraces from his dungeon crawls hidden underneath. He kept his head down, not out of timidity, but to avoid the inevitable stares. News of the sludge villain incident had spread. While the specifics were kept under wraps, the rumors painted a picture of a quirkless boy who suddenly manifested a terrifying, villainous power. He could feel the whispers and pointed fingers as he passed. "That's him, the sludge kid. I heard his quirk brings things back from the dead." "No way, that's just a rumor." "Sounds like a villain's power." He ignored them. Their opinions were irrelevant. He was here for one reason, to pass. The written exam was held in a massive auditorium. It was a grueling test of ethics, mathematics, history, and law. As the proctor yelled, "Begin!" a quiet calm settled over Izuku. His intelligence stat, diligently raised over 10 months, sharpened his focus to a razor's edge. The complex problems that had once seemed insurmountable now appeared with a crystalline clarity. He moved through the questions with an unnatural speed and efficiency, his pen scratching a steady rhythm. He finished with nearly half the time to spare, double-checking his answers before laying his pen down and simply waiting, his stillness a stark contrast to the frantic scribbling around him. After the written portion, they were herded into another, even larger auditorium for the practical exam briefing. The voice hero, Present Mike, stood on stage, a whirlwind of leather and blonde hair. "Welcome, little listeners, to today's live performance. Everybody say hey." A dead silence met him. Izuku barely registered the hero's bombastic energy. He was focused on the screen behind him, which detailed the exam's rules. Foe City. 3 types of villain bots with different point values. A simple, straightforward objective. It was a hunt. And hunting was something he now understood very well. As the great Napoleon Bonaparte once said, a true hero is someone who overcomes life's misfortunes. So go beyond. Plus ultra. Present Mike roared. Now you'll be facing 3 types of foe villains. 1-pointers, 2-pointers, and 3-pointers. Your goal is to use your awesome quirks to rack up as many points as you can. A tall, blue-haired boy with glasses shot to his feet, his hand chopping the air with rigid precision. "Sir! On the printout, there are clearly 4 types of villains listed. If this is a misprint, it is a gross oversight for an institution of UA's caliber. Furthermore, you with the messy green hair." Every head in the section turned to Izuku. You have been muttering and fidgeting this entire time. It is incredibly distracting. If you are not taking this exam seriously, then you should leave. Izuku blinked. He hadn't even realized he'd been tapping his fingers on his leg, a nervous habit from his previous life that still surfaced occasionally. He looked up at the boy, Tenya Ida, from the prestigious Ida hero family. In the past, such a public accusation would have made him curl up and die of shame. Now, he simply met Ida's glare with a flat, unwavering gaze. My apologies, Izuku said, his voice quiet but clear, devoid of any stammer or panic. I was merely strategizing. His calm, almost cold response seemed to unnerve Ida more than any flustered apology would have. The boy sat down, looking perplexed. President Mike quickly explained that the fourth robot was a 0-point obstacle, an arena trap best avoided. They were shuffled off to their designated battle centers. Izuku found himself at Battle Center B. As he stretched, he saw a familiar face, the kind brown-haired girl with the round cheeks from the auditorium. She looked incredibly nervous, bouncing on her heels and taking deep breaths. He also saw Bakugo, several yards away, cracking his knuckles and glaring at him with an expression of pure, concentrated fury. The confusion from the sludge incident had festered into a deep, burning resentment. Deku, the worthless, quirkless Deku, had somehow become strong. It was an affront to the natural order of the world, and Bakugo looked ready to burn the world down to set it right. The colossal gates of the battle center stood before them. There was no countdown. No warning shot. And start! President Mick's voice blared from hidden speakers. The crowd of examinees stood in confused silence. What's the matter? The test has begun. In a real battle, you don't get a tidy countdown. Run! Run! The advice was wasted on Izuku. The moment the first syllable of start had left the speakers, he had exploded into motion. His agility, honed by 100 dungeon runs, propelled him forward. He was a green and black blur, the first and only one to enter the city before the gates were even fully open. The other students stared after him. One guy's got the right idea! Someone shouted, and the rest of the pack surged forward. By the time they entered, Izuku was already racking up points. He didn't have a flashy quirk to show off. He was armed with a length of reinforced steel he'd torn from a damaged guardrail. He moved through the streets with a predator's economy of motion. A one-pointer rolled around a corner, its single red eye locking onto him. Izuku didn't slow down. He planted his foot, pivoted, and swung the steel bar in a devastating arc. His strength of 75 turned the simple weapon into a wrecking ball. The robot's head was sheared clean off its body in a spray of sparks and wires. Villain points 1. He didn't pause to admire his work. His sense stat tingled, warning him of an attack from above. He glanced up to see a 2-pointer leaping from a rooftop. He dropped the bar, crouched, and launched himself upwards, his enhanced legs carrying him 15 feet into the air. He landed on the robot's shoulders, drove his fingers into the gaps in its armor, and ripped its head off with his bare hands before using its falling body as a platform to leap to the next building. Villain points 3. He was a force of nature. Silent, efficient, and brutal. He flowed through the city like water, dismantling robots with a practiced ease that was utterly unnerving. In the observation room, a gallery of pro-heroes watched the monitors in stunned silence. Who is this kid? A voice asked. It was the R-rated hero, Midnight. He's moving with the precision of a veteran underground hero. What's his quirk? Some kind of simple strength enhancer? His records say he's quirkless. Aizawa grunted, his eyes narrowed, never leaving the monitor displaying Izuku's feed. Or was, until recently. Principal Nizu, a cup of tea held delicately in his paws, leaned closer to the screen, his intelligent black eyes gleaming. Oh, he is much more than that. Look at his point count. He's already at 28 points in the first 2 minutes. His physical prowess is remarkable, but it's his tactical awareness that's truly exceptional. He's not just fighting, he's mapping the city, predicting spawn points. He's treating this like a game he's played 1,000 times. Tashinori, in his skeletal form, stood in the back, a grim expression on his face. He has Nizu in places you can't even imagine. Back in the city, Bakugo was a whirlwind of explosions, blasting his way through robots with furious glee. But every time he cleared a street, he would see the smoking wreckage of robots that had already been taken down, torn apart with a savage, mechanical precision. He saw a flash of green hair disappearing around a corner, and grit his teeth. "Deku!" he roared to the empty street, his voice echoing off the buildings. "What the hell are you?" Izuku, meanwhile, had found himself in a tight alley, surrounded by a swarm of one-pointers. He had dispatched 3 of them, but they were boxing him in. Using the steel bar was too slow. He needed to clear them out quickly to keep his momentum. He looked at the mangled chassis of a robot he just destroyed. An idea, cold and practical, formed in his mind. He had never tried it on a non-living, non-magical entity before. But the system had called them faux villains. Perhaps they had a soul of a kind, a digital one. It was time to find out. He focused on the wreckage, his mind reaching for the now familiar power coiled in his soul. He spoke the word, a quiet, guttural command that was swallowed by the alleyway. "Arise!" The air temperature dropped precipitously. The other examinees in the adjoining street shivered, a sudden, inexplicable chill running down their spines. From the broken robot, a thick, black smoke began to pour, not rising, but slithering across the ground like liquid night. It coalesced, rising into a perfect, dark replica of the one-point robot. Its metallic shell was replaced by solid shadow, and its single eye ignited with an electric, sapphire blue flame. The other robots in the alley paused, their internal sensors struggling to classify this new entity. It registered as a villain, but also as something other. The shadow robot, receiving a silent command from its master, did not hesitate. It launched itself at its former brethren, its shadow claws tearing through armor plating with an unnatural ease. The examinees who peered into the alley to investigate the strange cold saw a sight that froze them in their tracks. Izuku stood calmly as a black, glowing-eyed monster of a robot tore apart the other machines with silent, terrifying efficiency. A villain? Did a real villain get in?" one of them screamed, stumbling backward. Izuku gave another mental command. The shadow robot finished its work, then turned and knelt before him, its glowing eye lowered, before dissolving into his shadow. He stepped out of the alley, leaving a trail of absolute destruction behind him. The other students scrambled away from him, their faces pale with fear. In the observation room, the atmosphere was thick with tension. "What in the world was that?" President Mike shrieked, leaping out of his chair. "Did that kid just create a villain bot? Is that his quirk?" Nizu was practically vibrating with intellectual excitement. "No, not creation," he mused, his whiskers twitching. "The original was already destroyed. This was reanimation. Necromancy. How utterly fascinating. To reanimate machinery, a technomancer's dream." Aizawa's hand went to the capture weapon around his neck. His own quirk, erasure, worked by disrupting the flow of quirk factors in a person's body. But as he watched the monitor, his instincts screamed at him that whatever he was seeing, it wouldn't work. "It feels wrong," he rasped, his voice low and serious. "That energy, it's not biological. It's not a quirk. It felt dead. Whatever that power is, it's an import from somewhere else." He looked over at the skeletal man in the back of the room. "All Might. You vouched for this boy. You know what this is." Toshinori met his gaze. "I know what he calls it. He calls it the system. And that," he said, gesturing to the screen where Izuku was now calmly dispatching another 3-pointer, "is just the beginning." As if on cue, the ground began to tremble. A deep, grinding roar echoed through the city as the buildings themselves began to shake. Dust and debris rained down from the rooftops. From the center of the city, a shadow fell over everything. The 0-pointer. It was a titan, a Goliath of green armor and blinking red lights that towered over the tallest buildings in the faux city. Its arms were the size of buses, its head a blocky monstrosity. It was less a robot and more a walking skyscraper of pure destruction. "It's the 0-pointer! Run for it! It's not worth any points! Just get away!" The students scattered like ants, a mad dash for the exit. This was the obstacle, the gimmick, the thing you were supposed to be smart enough to avoid. As Izuku was planning his own strategic retreat, he heard a cry. "Ow! My leg!" He turned. Lying under a massive slab of concrete, dislodged by the Titan's emergence, was the kind-faced girl from the entrance. Ochako Uraraka. She was trapped, directly in the path of the advancing behemoth. Her face was a mask of pain and terror. The heroes in the observation room tensed. "This is it," Aizawa said. "The true test. A hero's spirit isn't measured in points." Izuku didn't hesitate. The choice wasn't even a choice. For 10 months, he had been a soldier, a hunter, a player. But before all of that, he was a boy who wanted to save people. He broke into a dead sprint, not away from the zero-pointer, but directly towards it. "What is that kid doing?" Midnight exclaimed. "He's committing suicide." But Izuku had a plan. He couldn't destroy this thing with a steel bar. He couldn't tear its head off with his bare hands. And a single shadow robot wouldn't be enough. He was outmatched. But he wasn't the only one fighting. He came to a stop about 50 yards from Uraraka, planting his feet and taking a deep breath. He closed his eyes and reached deep into his shadow, into the cold, silent barracks where his army resided. He threw open the gates. "Arise." This time, the word was not a whisper. It was a command imbued with all the power and authority of a monarch. His shadow on the ground did not just darken, it exploded. It stretched and bled outwards, covering a 20-yard radius in a pool of absolute, churning blackness. The temperature in the entire battle center plummeted, and a visible frost began to creep across the asphalt. And from that pool of darkness, his army emerged. 37 shadow soldiers rose in eerie silence. Towering, black-furred wolves with glowing blue eyes and teeth like daggers. Cunning goblin mages, their hands crackling with shadow energy. Heavily armored lizard men wielding obsidian shields and spears. They rose from the ground, a silent, disciplined, and utterly terrifying legion of monsters. The other examinees, who had been fleeing, stopped dead in their tracks, their own problems forgotten. They could only stare in slack-jawed horror at the demonic army that had just materialized on the battlefield. Bakugo, who had been blasting his way towards the exit, froze mid-stride, his eyes wide with disbelief and a dawning, terrifying understanding. This was the power Deku had used on the sludge villain, magnified 100-fold. The Shadow Army did not wait for a second command. They knew their monarch's will. With a silent, unified snarl, they charged the zero-pointer. The wolves were a blur of black fur, swarming its giant feet, their shadow claws tearing through armor plating that was designed to withstand powerful quirks. The lizard men formed a phalanx, their shields deflecting falling debris. The goblin mages hurled bolts of pure shadow that exploded against the titan's joints, causing it to stumble. It was a scene from a nightmare apocalypse. A demon king leading his legion against a machine god. But Izuku's attention was elsewhere. While his army waged war, he ran to Uraraka's side. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice calm despite the chaos. My leg. I can't move it," she cried, tears in her eyes. He looked at the slab of concrete. It had to weigh several tons. Far too much for even his enhanced strength. But he had another tool. He raised his hand, palm open, towards the slab. He focused, drawing on his mana, on the strange, invisible force he could now command. Ruler's authority. Uraraka felt the pressure on her leg lessen. She watched in disbelief as the massive slab of concrete began to tremble, then slowly, miraculously, levitate into the air. Izuku's brow was beaded with sweat, and a faint blue aura shimmered around his outstretched hand. He was gritting his teeth, the strain immense. "Get out! Now!" he grunted. She scrambled free, hopping on her good foot. Once she was clear, Izuku let his concentration drop, and the slab crashed back to the ground with a deafening boom. By now, his army had crippled the zero-pointer. It was flailing, its legs shredded, its balance failing. It raised a massive fist to try and crush the swarm below, but it was too late. On Izuku's silent command, the entire army converged, climbing the robot's body in a wave of black, and tore its head clean off its shoulders. The Titan crashed to the ground, defeated. "Time's up!" The final buzzer blared, its sound almost anticlimactic. The exam was over. Silence fell over the battlefield. Izuku stood amidst a field of scrap metal and shattered concrete, the smoking remains of the zero-pointer behind him. His monstrous army stood around him, their forms beginning to flicker. They turned as one, their 37 pairs of glowing blue eyes fixing on him. And then, in a gesture that would be burned into the memory of every single person who witnessed it, they knelt. They knelt before their monarch in perfect, subservient silence. Izuku gave a final, mental command. Dismissed. One by one, they dissolved into nothing, melting back into the shadow at his feet until not a trace of them remained. He stood alone, panting slightly, the only evidence of what had transpired being the impossible level of destruction around him. The other students stared. They weren't looking at him with admiration. There was no awe, no gratitude for the spectacle. They looked at him with the same primal fear they had reserved for the zero-pointer. He hadn't just proven he was powerful. He had proven he was terrifying. In the observation room, no one spoke. Miza had dropped his teacup. Aizawa's eyes were wider than anyone had ever seen them. Finally, the principal spoke, his voice a hushed whisper filled with a terrifying glee. Well, I think we've found this year's wild card. The faculty erupted into a heated debate. It was clear Izuku had more than enough villain points to pass, and the unquantifiable rescue points from saving Uraraka were off the charts. But the nature of his power was a sticking point. We can't let that thing into our school, one teacher argued. His power is that of a villain. A demon lord. He used it to save another student, without hesitation. Cementos countered, his voice a calm rumble. His actions were heroic, regardless of the aesthetics of his quirk. The argument raged, but it was Toshinori who had the final word. He stepped forward, his presence filling the room despite his frail form. I have been observing young Midoriya for 10 months, he said, his voice quiet but firm. His heart is unwavering. That power is new to him, and it is indeed terrifying. But that is precisely why he needs us. He needs guidance. To turn him away out of fear would be the height of irresponsibility. We would be creating the very villain we are afraid of. He looked around at the assembled heroes. His actions today were purely heroic. He passed the test. He deserves a place at this school. His words, and the unspoken weight of his true identity, settled the matter. Izuku Midoriya would be admitted to UA High. But as he walked away from the battle center, ignoring the fearful stares and wide berth everyone gave him, he knew his trial was far from over. He had won his place, but he had done so by revealing the monster at his command. He had made his entrance, not as a shining hero, but as an ominous, encroaching shadow. The acceptance letter from Yue had not been a surprise, but its weight in his hands felt tangible, a solid affirmation of a new and terrifying reality. It arrived via a holographic projection of All Might, who offered congratulations with a subdued tone, his message laced with both pride and a heavy undercurrent of caution. For Izuku, the letter wasn't just an admission, it was a contract. A leash. A promise that the world's heroes would be watching his every move, waiting to see if the power he wielded would forge a hero or a catastrophe. His first day walking through the hallowed halls of UA was a study in isolation. He was a ghost haunting the edges of exuberant conversations, a rock in a river of excited students. The whispers that had followed him since the exam were now a constant, buzzing periphery to his senses. They would chatter and laugh until he drew near, at which point the conversations would die, and the students would part ways, creating a wide, unnatural berth around him. They didn't look at him with the disdain he had grown accustomed to as a quirkless nobody. They looked at him with something far worse, a hushed, reverent fear, as if he were a walking bad omen. He found the classroom door, a ridiculously oversized slab of wood and metal labeled 1A. Taking a deep, centering breath, he pushed it open. The room was already buzzing with the nervous energy of the country's elite. He saw the tall, rigid form of Tenya Ida, the boy who had reprimanded him during the briefing. He saw the cheerful, round-faced girl, Ochako Uraraka, who was talking animatedly with a girl with pink skin. And he saw him. Katsuki Bakugo was leaning back in his chair, feet propped on his desk, the very picture of arrogant disdain. The moment Izuku stepped through the door, Bakugo's head snapped towards him. His crimson eyes, narrowed to slits, burned with a furious, uncomprehending hatred. It wasn't the look he gave a rival. It was the look one gave to an aberration, a glitch in reality that needed to be violently deleted. Izuku ignored him, his face a carefully constructed mask of neutrality. He found an empty seat near the back, the students around him subtly shifting their desks an inch or two away. He felt Uraraka's gaze on him. She offered a small, hesitant smile and a tiny wave. It was a gesture of gratitude, but her eyes were wide, her posture tense. She was grateful he had saved her, but she was intimidated by what had saved her. The tense atmosphere was abruptly broken by a voice from the floor. "If you're here to make friends, you can pack up and leave." A man who looked like he hadn't slept in a decade lay on the floor in a yellow sleeping bag, slurping on a juice pouch. He unzipped himself and rose, a shambling figure with tired, bloodshot eyes and a capture weapon that looked like a tangled mess of bandages around his neck. "It took you all 8 seconds to quiet down. Time is a precious resource. You're not being rational enough." His gaze, heavy and critical, swept across the room. "I'm your homeroom teacher, Shota Aizawa. Pleasure to meet you." He pulled a blue gym uniform from his sleeping bag. "Put these on and meet me on the P grounds." Immediately, the quirk apprehension test began without preamble. Aizawa explained his philosophy of rational deception, and the looming threat of expulsion for the student who placed last sent a fresh wave of panic through the class. "Bakugo," Aizawa called out, his voice flat. "You placed first in the entrance exam. What was your best softball throw in junior high?" 67 meters. Bakugo grunted. "Try it with your quirk." Bakugo strode to the circle, a vicious smirk on his face. He wound up, and with a thunderous explosion, launched the ball into the sky. "Die!" he screamed, the word more a mantra than a curse. Aizawa's device beeped. 705.2 meters. Know your own maximum. It's the most rational way to form the foundation of a hero. The class erupted in excited murmurs. "We can use our quirks. This is going to be fun." "Fun?" Aizawa's voice dropped, and the air grew cold. "You have 3 years to become heroes. You think it's all going to be fun and games? Idiots." A dark, menacing grin spread across his face. "Today, you will compete in 8 physical tests to gauge your potential. Whoever comes in last place will be judged to have no potential and will be expelled on the spot." The excitement died, replaced by a grim determination. But Aizawa's tired, penetrating gaze wasn't on the class as a whole. It was fixed on one student. "Midoriya." Izuku's head snapped up. "You're the wild card," Aizawa said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "The unknown variable. The proctors and the principal have their theories, but I deal in facts. Let's get one now." Aizawa's eyes flared red, his black hair levitating around his head as he activated his quirk, Erasure. He was staring directly at Izuku, his gaze a physical force. The entire class felt the oppressive shift in the air as a powerful quirk was activated, and absolutely nothing happened to Izuku. He didn't feel a change. The cold, silent reservoir of power within him, the humming connection to his shadow soldiers, remained completely untouched. He simply stared back, his expression unreadable. Aizawa's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. He felt nothing. Usually, when he focused on someone, he could feel the connection, the severing of their quirk factor. With Midoriya, it was like staring at a rock. There was nothing there for his quirk to latch onto, yet he had seen the exam footage. He knew the power the boy held. "What is your power, Midoriya?" Aizawa demanded, his hair settling as he deactivated his quirk, his mind reeling. "It's not registered. It doesn't seem to have a biological component my erasure can affect. So, what is it?" The class held its breath. This was the question on everyone's mind. Izuku met his teacher's gaze, his own calm. He had rehearsed this. He would not lie, but he would not reveal the truth either. "It's my power, sensei," he said, his voice steady. "I am still learning its limits." The non-answer was more frustrating than any lie. Aizawa's jaw tightened. This kid was a problem. A black box of unknown variables that he couldn't control, or even nullify. "Fine," he grunted. "Show me. Show all of us what kind of potential you have." The first test was the 50-meter dash. Izuku was paired with Ida. As the starting pistol fired, Ida's engines roared to life, propelling him across the finish line in just over 3 seconds. It was an incredible display of speed. Izuku's turn came. He stood at the starting line, took a deep breath, and focused. He cast his own shadow forward. To the onlookers, it looked like his shadow on the asphalt simply stretched, a thin, dark line that raced towards the finish. Just as the line of shadow crossed the 50-meter mark, Izuku's body dissolved. He didn't run. He simply ceased to be at the starting line and rematerialized at the finish line in the exact same instant, a faint wisp of black smoke dissipating around him. It was silent, instantaneous, and deeply unnatural. The robotic voice of the sensor announced his time. 0.05 seconds. Silence. What was that? The class shouted in unison. Did he teleport? His shadow moved first. Ida stared, his jaw agape. Such a maneuver. It defies the laws of physics. He didn't travel the distance. He negated it. Aizawa just grunted, making a note on his tablet. Spatial manipulation. Not speed. High cost. Low cooldown? Unknown. The second test was grip strength. A brawny student with multiple arms managed an impressive 540 kilograms. Izuku stepped up, took the device, and squeezed. His strength stat, now well over 75, was far beyond the scope of a normal human. The device's digital display rapidly climbed, blurring past 600, 700, 800, before it let out a screech of protesting metal and a loud crack. The device went dead in his hand, its internal mechanism shattered. He had broken it. He handed the dead machine back to a stunned Aizawa. Standing long jump, side steps, distance run, he excelled at all of them, his system-enhanced body performing at a level that was consistently in the top percentile. But it was the softball throw that everyone was waiting for. He stepped into the circle, the ball feeling light in his hand. He could have just thrown it. His raw strength would have surely gotten him a score rivaling Bakugo's. But Aizawa wanted to see his power. He would show him. He threw the ball normally, a clean, powerful pitch. It shot upwards, arcing through the sky. But just as it reached its apex, and should have begun its descent, it didn't. A faint, shimmering blue aura, almost invisible in the bright sunlight, enveloped the ball. Instead of falling, it accelerated. It shot upwards like a missile, a tiny white speck that continued to climb until it vanished completely from sight. Aizawa stared at the device in his hand. The numbers were still climbing, tracking the ball as it left the atmosphere. Finally it beeped, displaying a small, elegant infinity symbol. Infinity. Uraraka stared, her mouth open. He did the same thing as me. But how? My quirk is zero gravity. I just negate its weight. He pushed it. He pushed it out of the sky. Bakugo was shaking, his hands clenched so tight his knuckles were white. Explosions popped and crackled in his palms. Teleportation. Super strength. Telekinesis. What the hell was Deku? It was like he had a dozen quirks, each one more impossible than the last. The quirkless, useless Deku he had built his entire worldview around had been replaced by this monster. As the test continued, Izuku noticed one student watching him with a unique intensity. It was Fumikage Tokoemi, the boy with the head of a crow. But it wasn't just him. The shadowy, sentient quirk that resided within him, Dark Shadow, would peek out from behind Tokoemi's shoulder, its yellow eyes wide. Whenever Izuku used a skill that leaked even a hint of his shadow mana, the shadow exchange or the faint wisps of smoke, Dark Shadow would let out a frightened chitter and retreat back inside its host. After the tests, as Aizawa was preparing to show the final results, Tokoemi approached him. The other students instinctively gave them a wide berth. Midoriya Izuku, Tokoemi said, his voice a low, formal baritone. A pleasure to make your acquaintance. You too, Tokoemi-san, Izuku replied, intrigued. This was the first student to approach him without fear. My companion, Dark Shadow, and I have been observing you, Tokoemi continued, gesturing to his own chest. Your power, it resonates with the abyss that dwells within me. It is a darkness of a different caliber. Ancient. Sovereign. Dark Shadow peeked out, gave a nervous warble, and then looked at Izuku not with fear, but with a profound, instinctual respect, like a lesser beast in the presence of an apex predator. It is not a quirk born of this world, is it? Izuku was taken aback by the boy's perception. He could feel it too, a connection to Tokoemi's power. It was a living shadow, much like his own soldiers, but bound to its host, wild and untamed. His own power was an army, disciplined and controlled. You are more perceptive than most, Izuku answered honestly. Your dark shadow, it feels familiar. Indeed, Tokoyami nodded, a flicker of understanding in his avian eyes. A reverie of darkness is upon us. I look forward to seeing the depths of your domain. With a final, respectful nod, he stepped away. Izuku watched him go. For the first time, he felt a crack in his isolation. Tokoyami wasn't afraid. He understood, on some fundamental level, what Izuku was. He didn't see a monster. He saw a king. Aizawa displayed the final results on a massive hologram. 1. Izuku Midoriya. 2. Momo Yaoyorozu. 3. Shoto Todoroki. 4. Katsuki Bakugo. 20. Minoru Mineta. Bakugo stared at the board, his face a mask of incandescent rage. He wasn't just beaten. He was beaten by Deku, who was at the very top. He launched himself forward, explosions already erupting from his hands. DKU! You bastard! Explain yourself! How did you? In a flash, Aizawa's capture weapon shot out, wrapping around Bakugo and immobilizing him. His quirk flared, and the explosions died. Stop using your quirk. I'm getting dry-eye. The teacher deadpanned. He released the fuming Bakugo. And for the record, the expulsion was a logical deception. To draw out your full potential. As the class collectively sighed in relief, Aizawa's gaze settled on Izuku one last time. Midoriya. You have potential, that much is undeniable. But potential without control is just a liability. Don't get comfortable. The rest of the day was a blur of normal classes. English with Present Mike, Modern Hero Art History with Midnight. Through it all, Izuku remained an island. He was the top student, the most powerful person in the class, and also the most feared. Then came the afternoon's lesson. I am coming through the door like a normal person. All Might burst into the classroom in his Silver Age costume, his presence sucking all the tension out of the room and replacing it with pure, unadulterated excitement. He announced their lesson for the day, combat training. He pressed a button, and cases slid out of the wall, containing their hero costumes. Izuku's costume was simple and practical. It was a dark green, full-body suit made of a durable, dungeon reward material, with black armor plates on his chest, shoulders, and knees. He wore a steel-enforced gas mask-like faceplate and a hood, designed more for anonymity than for mimicking his idol. He looked less like a hopeful hero and more like a special forces operative. All Might explained the exercise, an indoor, 2-on-2 battle. Heroes versus villains. The objective was for the heroes to touch a nuclear weapon prop or capture the villains. The villains had to protect the weapon or capture the heroes. The teams were drawn by lots. Izuku watched as the names were pulled. And then, the inevitable happened. Team A will be Izuku Midoriya and Ochako Uraraka. Uraraka gave a nervous squeak. She glanced at Izuku's intimidating costume, then quickly looked away. And their opponents. Team D will be Katsuki Bakugo and Tenya Ida. A chill went down Izuku's spine. It was a worst-case scenario. A grudge match. All Might announced the matchup. Team A would be the heroes, Team D the villains. As they prepared, Bakugo stalked past Izuku, deliberately bumping his shoulder. His voice was a low, venomous hiss, meant only for him. We're not even in the ring yet, and I can tell you're shaking in your boots, you damn nerd. Tell me what's going on. What's with that power? I'm gonna beat you to a pulp today and make you talk. Izuku didn't respond. He simply walked over to his partner, who was wringing her hands nervously. Midoriya-kun, she started. It's kind of a bad matchup, huh? Bakugo-kun seems to really have it in for you. He does, Izuku confirmed, his voice slightly muffled by his mask. Which is why we're not going to play his game. He pulled out a blueprint of the building. His analytical mind, now supercharged by his intelligence stat, was already running 1,000 simulations. Ida will be guarding the weapon. He's fast, but he's predictable. Bakugo is the wild card. He'll ignore the objective and come straight for me. He's an ambush predator. We'll use that. He laid out a simple, effective plan. Uraraka listened, her nervousness slowly replaced by a sense of awe at his tactical acumen. He wasn't just a powerhouse, he was a strategist. Can you really do that? What you're planning? She asked, referring to the core of his strategy. Izuku looked down at his own shadow. Yes. But I need you to trust me. She looked into the green lenses of his mask, saw the unwavering confidence there, and nodded. Okay. I trust you. The match began. As they entered the building, just as Izuku predicted, Bakugo came screaming around a corner, his first explosion tearing a chunk out of the wall where Izuku's head had been a second before. Come on, DKU! Don't dodge! He roared. Izuku's combat instincts, honed in dungeons where a single mistake meant death, took over. He moved with a fluid grace, his body a hair's breadth away from Bakugo's explosive attacks. He wasn't fighting back, only evading, leading the furious blonde deeper into the building's labyrinthine corridors. In the monitoring room, the other students were glued to the screen. Bakugo is all over him, Kirishima said. Midori is not even fighting back. Man's intuition. All Might said quietly, his fists clenched. No, young Kirishima. He's baiting a trap. Bakugo finally cornered him in a dead-end hallway. Nowhere left to run, you cheating bastard! He snarled, raising his gauntlet. You've been looking down on me all this time, haven't you, with that secret power of yours? Well, not anymore. Izuku stopped, his back to the wall. You're wrong, Kaken. I've never looked down on you. I've always admired you. He braced himself. This was the moment. But I'm not the same person you grew up with. He stomped his foot on the ground. The temperature in the corridor plunged. From his shadow, a form began to rise. It wasn't the chaotic swarm from the entrance exam. It was a single, humanoid figure. It was an elite Shadow Knight he had extracted from a high-level D-rank dungeon, a silent warrior clad in full-plate armor made of solidified darkness, a jagged sword in one hand and a tower shield in the other. Its visor was dark, but from within, 2 points of brilliant blue light burned with cold intensity. Bakugo stumbled back, his rage momentarily replaced by shocked horror. What the hell is that thing? The Shadow Knight took a step forward, positioning itself between Izuku and Bakugo, its shield raised. Izuku spoke into his communicator. Uraraka. Now, on the 5th floor, Ida was diligently playing his villain role, monologuing to an empty room about the weapon's safety. Suddenly Uraraka burst through the door. I'm here! She yelled. So you've come, hero! Ida boomed. You will never get past my impenetrable defense. Uraraka just smiled. I don't have to. She slapped her hands on a massive pillar near the center of the room, making it weightless. Then, using a move from the apprehension test, she slammed her hands on the floor, making herself float. As Ida charged, she used the weightless pillar as a bat, swinging it, and creating a massive cloud of debris and dust. Downstairs, Bakugo was locked in a furious battle with the Shadow Knight. The creature was his equal in strength and faster than it looked. It fought with a silent, relentless precision, its sword and shield deflecting his explosions and forcing him back. It felt no pain, no fear, only the cold, logical execution of its master's will. This infuriated Bakugo more than anything. He couldn't intimidate it. He couldn't overpower it. He was fighting a machine. Get out of my way, you puppet! He screamed, unleashing a massive explosion that blew the knight back, but it rose again, unharmed. While he was occupied, Izuku had already slipped away. He raced up the stairs, following the sounds of the commotion. He arrived at the bomb room just as the dust was settling. Ida was frantically searching for Uraraka, who was floating near the ceiling. It's over, Ida-kun, Izuku said, appearing in the doorway. Ida spun around. Midoriya! So you've abandoned your post? Izuku just raised his hand. Ruler's authority. A piece of rubble near Ida's feet lifted and shot towards him. He easily dodged, but it was a feint. The real attack was on the weapon itself. Izuku's telekinetic grip latched onto the massive prop. It was too heavy to lift, but he didn't need to lift it. He just needed to pull. The bomb slid across the floor, away from Ida's reach. At the same moment, Uraraka dropped from the ceiling, her hands outstretched. She slapped the papier-mâché surface. I've got it! The hero team! Why yins? All Might's voice boomed through the building. Downstairs, the Shadow Knight paused its assault, turned to smoke, and seeped back into the floor. Bakugo stood alone in the wrecked hallway, panting, his gauntlets smoking. He had been defeated, not by Deku, but by his shadow, his puppet. The humiliation was absolute. He let out a raw, guttural scream of pure, impotent rage. Back in the monitoring room, the class was silent. They had just witnessed a complete tactical victory. Midoriya had analyzed his opponents, predicted their actions, and neutralized them with terrifying efficiency, all while using the bare minimum of his monstrous power. He hadn't just won, he had dominated. As Team A returned, they were met with a mixture of awe and apprehension. Uraraka was beaming, high on their victory. Izuku gave a simple nod to All Might. He had proven his point. He had control. He was not a mindless monster. He was a strategist. But as he looked at the faces of his classmates, at Todoroki's calculating stare, at Ida's troubled frown, at the sheer terror in Mineta's eyes, he knew he hadn't won them over. He had only deepened the chasm between them. He was in his dream school, surrounded by the future heroes of Japan, but the shadow of his power kept them all at a distance, a constant reminder that he was something different. Something other. And as he felt the silent praise of his knight from within his own shadow, he realized that, for now, his army was the only company he truly had. The bus ride to the unforeseen simulation joint was, for most of Class 1A, a loud, cheerful affair. It was their first off-campus excursion, a tangible step on the road to becoming pro-heroes, and the air crackled with a potent mixture of excitement and nervous energy. I gotta say, Midoriya, your power is kinda manly, but it's seriously spooky, Eijiro Kirishima said, his sharp-toothed grin unwavering. He was one of the few who seemed completely undeterred by the ominous display during the apprehension test. My hardening is straightforward, you know. But your whole Shadow Monster Knight thing is nuts. It's like something out of a dark fantasy game. Izuku, seated by the window, offered a small, practiced smile. I'm still getting used to it. I tend to say what's on my mind, Midoriya-chan. Tsuyu Ajiri added from the seat across, her finger pressed to her chin. Your power doesn't seem like a quirk. It's too quiet. Quirks are usually loud and flashy. Yours is silent. Kero. The observation was so unnervingly accurate that it silenced the immediate area. The students who had been listening in suddenly found the passing scenery fascinating. The fear Izuku inspired was a strange, multifaceted thing. It wasn't the aggressive wariness they had for Bakugo, nor was it the awe they had for Todoroki. It was a deep, instinctual unease, the kind of flock of birds feels when a hawk circles overhead. They knew he was on their side, but the shadow he cast was long and cold. Izuku felt it constantly. The connection to his soldiers was a low, persistent thrum in the back of his mind, a silent chorus of 37 voices that spoke only of loyalty. He was never alone, and because of that, he had never felt more isolated. He had spent his entire life on the outside looking in, and now, even with a power that placed him at the very top, he was still on the outside. The only difference was that before, the glass was clear. Now, it was stained black. Their arrival at the USJ momentarily dispelled the tension. The facility was a colossal dome, a self-contained world of simulated disasters. They were greeted by the space hero, 13, whose bubbly personality was a stark contrast to their perpetually exhausted homeroom teacher. Welcome, everyone! 13 announced, gesturing with their bulky, gloved hands. I've created this facility to simulate all manner of accidents and disasters. We have a landslide zone, a shipwreck, a conflagration, a windstorm. It is a place where you will learn to save lives. As 13 explained the dangers of their own quirks and the importance of using them for rescue, Izuku sensed that, a sixth sense he had come to rely on implicitly, began to prickle. It was a faint, almost imperceptible warning, like the static in the air before a lightning strike. He scanned the massive dome, his eyes lingering on the central plaza below. Something was wrong. Just as Aizawa was about to begin the lesson, the lights in the facility flickered and died, plunging them into a dim, eerie twilight. The central fountain sputtered and ceased its flow. Aizawa's head snapped towards the plaza. 13. Protect the students, he commanded, his voice sharp and devoid of its usual apathy. From the center of the plaza, the air began to warp and twist. A pinprick of black expanded into a swirling, purple-black vortex, a gaping wound in the fabric of space. It was a sight so unnatural that it seemed to suck the very sound from the air. From its depths, figures began to emerge. First a few, then dozens, then 100. A motley, grotesque army of thugs and criminals, their faces twisted into sneers and manic grins. Is this part of the training too? Kirishima asked, his smile finally faltering. Like the entrance exam? Stay back! Aizawa barked, pulling his yellow goggles over his eyes. Those are real villains, the students gasped, a wave of fear rippling through the class. This wasn't a simulation. This was an invasion. 3 figures emerged last from the portal. One was a creature of living mist, its form vaguely humanoid with 2 glowing yellow eyes. The second was a behemoth, a monstrous brute of exposed muscle and dark purple skin, its brain visible on the top of its skull, its eyes vacant and dead like a doll's. The final figure was the one who drew every eye. He was a lanky man covered in disembodied hands, on his face, his arms, his shoulders, that gripped him like morbid trophies. He moved with a twitchy, unsettling energy, scratching furiously at his neck. So many heroes! The hand-covered man rasped, his voice dry and scratchy, like crumbling paper. The schedule we procured said All Might was supposed to be here. Ah, what a shame! He tilted his head, his visible eye glinting with a childish, psychotic glee. I wonder if he'll show up if we kill a few of his students. In that instant, Aizawa was in motion. He leaped from the top of the stairs, his capture weapon unfurling like sentient ribbons, a one-man vanguard against an army. 13. Get them out of here! Kaminari, try the communications, but it was too late. The villain made of purple mist expanded, engulfing the exit. A pleasure to meet you. We are the League of Villains, the mist creature said, its voice a smooth, polite baritone that was chillingly at odds with the situation. My role is to scatter you and to torture you to death. Darkness erupted. Izuku felt a nauseating, twisting sensation, as if his very atoms were being pulled apart and reassembled. He caught a glimpse of Kirishima and Bakugo lunging at the mist villain, of his classmates screaming as they were consumed by the warp gate, before his world dissolved into a purple void. He landed with a splash in cold, murky water. The air was thick with the smell of salt and rot. He had been transported to the shipwreck zone, the flood zone. He surfaced, gasping, and saw 2 other heads bobbing in the water nearby. Tsuyu Ajui, her frog-like features perfectly at home in the aquatic environment, and Minoru Mineta, who was screaming, tears and snot streaming down his face as he clung to a piece of floating debris. We're gonna die! We're gonna die! Mineta wailed. Calm down, Mineta-chan, Tsuyu said, her voice a steady croak. We need to assess the situation. Kero. Izuku wasn't panicking. His mind was a cold, clear stream of tactical analysis. The dungeon runs had conditioned him for this. This was a hostile environment, populated by enemies. The objective was survival and neutralization of the threat. The water around their large ship began to churn. Villains with aquatic quirks, gills, fins, shark-like features, surrounded them, their laughter echoing across the water. Look what we got! A couple of brats. One with a shark's head jeered. The boss said to scatter and kill? Let's start here. Mineta's screams hit a new, higher pitch. Tsuyu's face hardened with determination. Izuku took a deep breath, the cold water a familiar shock. He couldn't unleash his whole army here. It was too much, too soon. It would reveal his hand completely. He needed to be surgical. He needed to be efficient. Stay close to the ship, he said, his voice low and steady, cutting through Mineta's hysterics. Both of them turned to him, surprised by his absolute calm. He looked down at his own shadow, barely visible on the dark surface of the water. He reached into that well of power, not opening the floodgates, but drawing out 2 specific soldiers. Hunters. Fast. Lethal. Arise, he whispered, the command for his ears only. 2 ripples disturbed the water on either side of him, but not from something surfacing. 2 forms blacker than the murky depths, rose out of his shadow on the water. They were two of his shadow wolves. They were massive, the size of ponies, their fur made of shifting, semi-solid darkness, and their eyes were twin pools of burning blue fire. Most unnervingly, they stood on the surface of the water as if it were solid ground, their shadowy paws making no splash. The villains, who had been closing in, stopped dead in their tracks. Their taunting laughter died in their throats. What the hell are those things? One of them stammered. Mineta had stopped screaming, his mouth hanging open in silent, abject terror. Tsuya's large eyes widened even further. This was a far cry from the single, armored knight he had summoned during combat training. These were beasts. Monsters from a forgotten myth. Izuku gave a single, silent command. Go. The wolves didn't roar. They were utterly silent. They shot across the water, moving with an impossible, fluid speed, leaving faint, dark trails in their wake. The villains barely had time to react. The first wolf lunged, its jaws of solidified shadow clamping down on a fishman's head. There was no blood, only a sickening crunch and a flash of blue light as the villain's life force was snuffed out. The wolf didn't even pause, it simply dropped the body and moved to the next target. The second wolf was even more terrifying. It phased through a villain's water jet attack, its form momentarily becoming intangible smoke, before solidifying again and dragging the man under the surface. A brief, violent struggle churned the water, and then silence. It wasn't a fight. It was an execution. In less than 30 seconds, the dozen villains in the water were either unconscious, dragged to the bottom, or fleeing in pure terror. The two wolves returned to Izuku's side, their blue eyes fixed on him, awaiting their next order. They dripped not water, but wisps of black smoke. So cool! Mineta whimpered, a mixture of horror and awe on his face. They're efficient, Tsuya stated, though her voice trembled slightly. She looked at Izuku with a new, profound understanding. This was the true nature of his power, not just summoning, but commanding a legion of absolute predators. They're tools, Izuku corrected, his voice flat. He gave another command, and the wolves dissolved back into his shadow. Let's go. Aizawa-sensei is in trouble. Back in the central plaza, Shota Aizawa was a whirlwind of controlled chaos. He moved like a dancer through the sea of villains, his capture weapon a flowing extension of his body, his movements precise and brutal. He was a master of fighting quirk users. He would erase their power with a glance and then exploit the resulting shock and panic with a devastating flurry of hand-to-hand combat. He took down 10, then 20, then 30 villains, a one-man army holding the line. But he was only one man. His quirk flickered as he blinked, and a villain with a strength-enhancing quirk managed to land a solid blow. He grunted, stumbling back. He was beginning to tire. His dry eye was becoming a serious problem. You're cool, Eraserhead, Shigaraki said, scratching his neck with a manic energy. You're a real pro. But you're not the one we came for. He gestured lazily at the muscle-bound behemoth beside him. Numa, take care of him. The creature moved with a speed that defied its massive frame. Aizawa's eyes widened, but he couldn't react in time. A fist the size of a cinder block slammed into him, and the world became a universe of pain. He was thrown through the air, his arm shattering on impact with the ground. He tried to get up, tried to erase the monster's quirk, but it was on him in an instant. It grabbed his head and slammed it into the concrete, again and again. The sound was a sickening, wet crunch. Shigaraki giggled. He's so cool, my Nomu. He's a bioengineered anti-symbol of peace. He's got shock absorption and super regeneration. He's strong enough to fight All Might at 100%. You can't beat him, hero. The Nomu raised a fist to deliver the final, crushing blow. Aizawa's goggles were shattered, his face a mask of blood. He had failed. His students, I'm getting tired of this. Shigaraki whined, looking at Aizawa's broken form. You're really not that cool after all. You're just a single-player hero trying to clear a raid dungeon. You can't win. Get away from him. The voice was cold, quiet, and came from the top of the stairs. Shigaraki, the Nomu, and the remaining villains looked up. Standing at the edge of the plaza were 3 students, a frog girl, a terrified-looking dwarf, and the green-haired boy from the entrance exam videos. Shigaraki tilted his head. Oh? A student? Did you get lost on your way to being killed? You can't save him. He's already broken. Just like this whole society of fake heroes. Izuku's eyes were fixed on Aizawa's crumpled, bleeding form. He saw his teacher, a man who had pushed them, threatened them, and ultimately tried to protect them, being beaten to death. He saw the glee on the villain's face. In that moment, something inside him, a carefully constructed wall of restraint and control he had been building for months, crumbled into dust. All Might wasn't here. The other pros weren't coming. It was just him. He had hidden his true power to avoid scaring people, to try and fit in, to be seen as a hero and not a monster. What a rational deception that had been. You talk about this like it's a game, Izuku said, his voice dropping to a dangerously low temperature. He took a step forward, and the air in the entire USJ seemed to crystallize. A palpable wave of pressure, cold and immense, rolled out from him, making every villain in the dome shudder. It was an aura of pure, unadulterated killing intent, honed over 100 dungeon clears and countless life-or-death battles. Tsuyu and Mineta, standing behind him, felt it most acutely. It was like standing at the epicenter of an Arctic vortex. Mineta collapsed, whimpering, while Tsuyu shivered uncontrollably, her instincts screaming at her that the greatest predator in the room was not the villain, but her classmate. Shigaraki stopped scratching. He felt it too. The air of the game had vanished, replaced by something ancient and oppressive. What is this? Izuku didn't answer. He just took another step, and his shadow on the ground began to boil. It expanded, a pool of churning, liquid darkness that spread across the plaza floor. You wanted to see what happens when the final boss shows up? Izuku's eyes, burning with a cold green fire, locked onto Shigaraki's. You're about to find out. He raised his hand. Arise. It was not a command. It was a decree. The plaza became a shadow-wreathed throne room. From the pool of darkness at his feet, his army emerged. Not 2 wolves, not 1 knight. All of them, 37 shadow soldiers rose in absolute, unnerving silence. Black-furred wolves with burning blue eyes. Goblin mages clutching staffs that crackled with shadow energy. Hulking lizard men bearing obsidian shields and spears. And at their head, the imposing figure of his elite knight, its shadowy armor seeming to drink the very light from the air. A legion of nightmares had answered their monarch's call. The remaining 50 or so fodder villains, who had been cheering on Aizawa's demise, stopped cold. Their bravado evaporated, replaced by raw, primal terror. This wasn't a hero. Heroes didn't command armies of demons. The Shadow Army did not wait for another order. Their master's intent was clear. They moved as one, a silent, black tide of death that washed over the plaza. The villains screamed. They tried to fight back, to use their quirks, but it was a massacre. The wolves were blurs of motion, their shadow claws tearing through flesh and bone. The lizard men were an unbreakable shield wall, their spears piercing any who came close. The goblins rained down bolts of shadow that left their targets frozen or writhing in agony. It was over in a minute. The plaza was littered with the groaning, defeated bodies of the League's foot soldiers. Shigaraki stared, his single visible eye wide with disbelief and fury. No! No, no, no! That's cheating. You're not a hero. You're a bugged character. An overpowered NPC. That's not fair. His voice rose to a hysterical shriek. His rage was focused on Izuku, who was now walking calmly across the plaza, his army parting before him like the Red Sea. He knelt beside Aizawa, checking his pulse. Faint, but there. It doesn't matter. Shigaraki snarled, his composure completely gone. You can't beat my Numa. He was designed to kill All Might. He'll kill all of your little pets. He pointed a shaking finger. Numa! Kill him! Kill the cheater! The Numu, which had been standing motionless, let out a bird-like shriek and charged. The Shadow Army met it head-on. A dozen wolves leaped onto its back, tearing at its exposed muscle. The lizard men raised their shields, bracing for impact. The Numu was a force of nature. It grabbed 2 lizard men and simply ripped them in half. They shattered like black glass, dissolving into smoke. It swatted the wolves away, its powerful blows turning them into dissipating shadows. The army was strong, but the Numu was a true monster. It was tearing through his soldiers. But they were doing their job. They felt no pain, no fear. They were buying him time. Super regeneration. Shock absorption, Izuku's mind catalogued, his eyes tracking the Numu's every move as he gently moved Aizawa out of the line of fire. It doesn't protect the brain. Its movements are strong, but clumsy. It's a puppet, following orders. He couldn't let his entire army be destroyed. They were a finite resource, bound to his mana. He stood up, and from the system's inventory, he summoned his twin daggers. They appeared in his hands in a shimmer of blue light, their edges sharp enough to cut the air. He gave a new command to his soldiers. Distract. The remaining 20 soldiers, including his elite knight, all converged on the Numu in a single, coordinated assault. It was a dog pile of shadow and fury, designed for one purpose, to create an opening. The Numu roared, thrashing and tearing his soldiers apart, but for a precious 3 seconds, its head and exposed brain were held in place by the sheer weight of its assailants. It was more than enough time. Izuku's body flickered. He used a short burst shadow exchange with a tiny piece of shadow he'd cast behind the Numu, teleporting instantly behind the beast. He was a blur of green and black, his daggers held in a reverse grip. Ruler's authority flared around his legs, giving him a final, explosive burst of upward momentum. He was airborne. Time seemed to slow. He saw the Numu's head, the pulsating, grotesque brain. He plunged both daggers deep into it, down to the hilt, with all the system-enhanced strength he possessed. There was a wet, squelching sound, and the Numu's body went rigid. The bird-like shriek cut off. Its struggle ceased. The light in its dead eyes faded completely. The remaining shadow soldiers were thrown off as the behemoth collapsed, crashing to the plaza floor with a ground-shaking thud. It was dead. A heavy silence fell over the USJ. Shigaraki stood frozen, his mouth agape. His ultimate weapon, his anti-symbol of peace, was dead. Then, something new happened. From the corpse of the Numu, a thick, black-purple miasma began to rise. It was dense and heavy, a visible manifestation of the raw, twisted power that had animated the creature. Izuku felt it. A wellspring of dark mana, potent and chaotic. The system chimed in his mind, a single, glorious prompt. A target containing a large amount of mana has been slain. Shadow extraction may now be attempted. Shigaraki laughed, a broken, hysterical sound. You killed it! So what? You killed it! You still can't beat me in Kurogiri! Izuku ignored him. He walked towards the fallen monster, the dark miasma swirling around his feet. He stretched out his hand and spoke the single word that had become the cornerstone of his new existence. A word of creation. A word of dominion. Arise. The miasma violently converged. It was sucked into the Numu's shadow on the floor, which began to writhe and churn like a boiling cauldron of pitch. A hand of pure, solidified darkness clawed its way out of the ground. Then another. A hulking form, larger and more menacing than the original, pulled itself from the shadow. It was a perfect, idealized replica of the Numu, its skin the color of a starless midnight, its muscles defined by shifting, ethereal lines of shadow. The exposed brain was gone, replaced by a smooth, armored cranium. And where its eyes had been vacant and dead, 2 massive orbs of brilliant, sapphire blue energy now burned with silent, unwavering loyalty. The shadow Numu rose to its full, terrifying height, towering over Izuku. And then, with a grace that belied its monstrous form, it dropped to one knee, lowering its head before its new master. At that exact moment, the doors to the USJ burst open with a deafening boom. I am here! All Might stood at the entrance, his signature smile fixed on his face, ready for battle. But the smile faltered, then vanished completely. The scene before him was not what he had expected. The plaza was a field of defeated villains. His colleague, Aizawa, was grievously wounded but safe, and at the center of it all stood his young protege, Izuku Midoriya, with a demonic army of shadows dissipating behind him, and a nightmare creature that looked like a more terrifying version of the monster he was briefed on, kneeling at the boy's feet. Shigaraki Tamura let out a scream. It was not a scream of rage or frustration. It was a raw, piercing shriek of pure, unadulterated terror. He stumbled backward, clawing at his face. Kurogyri! Get us out of here! Now! The game's bugged! The final boss is here! I want to go home! I want a do-over! The purple mist swirled around him, and in an instant, the two remaining villains vanished, their leader's terrified screams echoing in the silent dome. All Might took a hesitant step forward, his mind struggling to process the horrifying, triumphant tableau before him. His successor had just saved the day. And he looked like the king of hell. Izuka paid him no mind. He looked at his new soldier. It was magnificent. The power he could feel radiating from it was immense, far exceeding his elite knight. This was not a soldier. This was a general, his first general. It needs a name, he thought, feeling the creature's silent, eager anticipation through their new bond. Something that defines its purpose. An unstoppable force designed to break through any defense. He gave his new general its first, silent command, and its new name, Juggernaut.